The Meridian Peace Summit on Station Wobbleplex 7 was already a disaster in slow motion, half a light cycle behind schedule, 2 species deep into a passive-aggressive translation war, and at least one ambassador actively trying to mate with a ficus. But the real trouble began when the conference doors hissed open and in limped Commander Jax Triggs, slinging more sarcasm than plasma grenades and wearing the facial expression of someone who'd been accidentally promoted for saying, "Sure, too close to a war." Her right arm was in a sling, her boots were up on the polished delegation table, and she was halfway through ordering a case of caffeinated protein bars, 400 coffee filters, and something ominously labeled Class 4 Vibe Check Munitions from the Intergal Prime app. The moment her presence was noticed, Ambassador Drizzlethorpe of the Buglarian Hive Network emitted a high-frequency chirp of bureaucratic horror, fluttering his wing stubs as he pointed at the glowing roster hovering over the summit table. She's not on the list." Chancellor Mucuson of the Hegemony of Wet Rocks didn't even look up from his soup bowl of fermented moss broth and muttered through 3 jowls. "Ignore it. Probably just lost. Humans wander into all sorts of places, like battles or treaties." General Shardskull of the Shardboy Collective, who looked like a sentient chandelier built by someone with anger issues, blinked all 6 of his glowing eyes and muttered, "Humans don't get lost. They get involved. And then things explode." Which, in hindsight, might have been the last sane moment of the summit. Because when they asked what exactly she was doing there, Jax calmly sipped from a collapsible mug labeled World's Okayest Seal and replied, "Actually, subsection 9B of the Accords allows observer status for any stakeholder in interstellar logistics. Earth ships move 90% of the quadrant's caffeine through this corridor. Technically, I'm here to protect the beans." And in the silence that followed, 1,000 legal subroutines in 12 different alien neural networks spontaneously fried like discount circuits at a plasma yard sale. Ambassador Gaseous Fumes of the Floaty Cloud Consortium puffed himself into a thunderous swirl of scented fog and demanded, "You're a combat specialist. What qualifies you for diplomacy?" And Jax, without missing a beat or dropping her smirk, said, "I specialize in conflict resolution. Sometimes with bullets, sometimes with bullets and sarcasm. Depends on the vibe." A hollow pane quietly flickered behind her, revealing her official designation, Commander Jax Triggs, U.S. Navy SEAL, Earth Division, Special Recon, and also, unfortunately, accidentally verified as a temporary observer by a clerk who thought combat operative was a musical position. The room erupted into a shuffle of horrified murmurs as someone cross-referenced her record, the Kepler Ghost. The woman who defended an entire station by herself, allegedly using improvised railguns, repurposed botany labs, and one extremely confused vending machine. The legends had said she once killed a void cultist using a sourdough starter and a stern look. And here she was, smiling politely, tapping her tablet to reschedule a physical therapy session and muttering, "Hope this wraps soon. I've got a load of laundry sitting in orbit." By now, Ambassador Cloudfart of the Nimbus Refrain had partially evaporated into what analysts would later call an anxiety-based drizzle, while General Shardskull began humming high-frequency disaster tones and asking if anyone else smelled ozone. The room, once confidently smug in its peacetime procedures, was now trying not to make eye contact with a human whose idea of diplomacy seemed to involve letting others dig their own graves while she held the shovel and offered them ergonomic tips. And then her tablet chimed again, flashing a shipping confirmation. "Nice," Jack said cheerfully. "My espresso mines arrived." And it was in that precise moment that 5 civilizations collectively updated their war doctrine to include avoid provoking caffeine-starved humans in tactical recovery mode. And so it began, not with war, not with ultimatums, but with one woman, one sling, and the horrifying realization that humanity's ambassador to peace had just threatened everyone with kindness, logistics, and espresso-based deterrence. Jax leaned back in her chair, the kind designed for quadrupeds with hydraulic lumbar support and absolutely no concern for human anatomy, and somehow made it look like a throne. Her combat boots clicked on the edge of the peace table with the rhythmic confidence of someone who'd just mentally catalogued every escape route, enemy weakness, and which species at the table would cry if yelled at. "So," she said, scrolling casually through something that may or may not have been a tactical threat assessment of everyone present. "Does anyone here know if the snack bar serves meat or just meat-adjacent sentient fungi again?" A small ambassador from the Goo Collective raised a wobbling pseudopod in protest, only to be silenced by a glance so polite it hurt. The room, once full of pompous diplomatic posturing and endless procedural recitations, now resembled a kindergarten where the teacher had just walked in and asked who'd peed on the quantum foam carpet. Ambassador Gaseous Fumes fluffed himself into a stately cumulonimbus and hissed, "You're a weaponized liability. Your very presence here is an act of destabilizing intimidation." "Sir," Jax replied, barely looking up from her tablet, "I haven't done anything. I'm literally sitting here, not murdering you. That's the opposite of intimidation. That's restraint, which you should thank me for, loudly." A murmur of panic bubbled through the crowd as her credentials pinged again. And the hollow emitter in the center of the room, ever helpful and completely oblivious to the concept of subtlety, pulled up her incident report from the Kepler outpost. The footage began automatically because of course it did, and the room was treated to the charming image of Jax, bloodied and grinning, duct-taping an explosive device to a hydroponics pod labeled Lettuce Experimental. She was humming the Earth National Anthem, backwards, while rerouting station power through a vending machine. "Pause playback," she said mildly, and the image froze with her halfway through decapitating a void cultist using a tray of emergency nutrient paste and what appeared to be a spoon. "I just want to point out that entire station had a crew of 300. I evacuated all of them before initiating countermeasures, so technically, my kill count was efficient. Also, the vending machine still works." A nervous analyst from the Uzarian Diplomatic Corps twitched, then whispered into a shared translator node, "She saved everyone and monetized the trauma. This is cultural warfare." Tentaclaw, a tentacled behavior specialist from the Galactic Institute of Psychological Stability, floated forward on his hover disk with the expression of someone deeply regretting their career path. "Commander Triggs, how exactly did you adapt so quickly to the Kepler station siege? We have no record of formal strategic input." "I watched the cultists for 6 minutes, figured out they liked chanting in low-gravity zones and weaponized." "The plumbing," Jax said, sipping her espresso without blinking. "It's amazing what you can do with pressure valves and a strong opinion about mold." The hover disk began slowly backing away. "And were you trained for this?" "Sure, we all are. Earth has 17 different emergency training courses, including one titled DIY Diplomacy, Negotiation through Tactical Gardening. I passed with honors." Someone audibly gasped. It might have been Cloudfart, who was now clinging to a diplomatic fern for stability. The Floaty Cloud Consortium, once the proud peacemakers of 5 quadrants, were now hovering in fragmented horror, whispering wind sounds that translated roughly to, "We are not ready for these people." Ambassador Bugzipper from the Squidivian Accord leaned forward, translucent with stress, and asked the question that had been trembling at the edges of everyone's collective consciousness. "Commander Triggs, how would your civilian population respond to a threat of this magnitude?" Jax tilted her head, then shrugged. "Honestly, poorly. Someone had live-stream it. Others would build flamethrowers out of lawn equipment. There'd be memes. Lots of memes." "Memes? It's how we process trauma, through sarcasm and casual doom posting, sometimes through interpretive dance. Depends on the time zone." Bugzipper collapsed into a puddle of existential uncertainty. And then, as if reality itself wanted to lean into the bit, her tablet chimed again. "Oop! Update from Earth Command," Jax said cheerfully. Apparently a daycare in Nebraska just filed a defense patent for an anti-siege foam cannon disguised as a ball pit. The words hung in the air like a war crime dressed as a birthday party. "Is that normal?" asked General Shardskull, whose entire species was known for surviving asteroid collisions through sheer passive-aggressive vibration. "Define normal," Jax said, flashing him the kind of grin that made his fractures sweat. "On Earth, that's called Thursday." At this point, several delegates began tapping at invisible panels, consulting advisors. One even attempted to fake a death certificate to flee early. And Jax? She sat there quietly, the human-shaped representation of a system error in the galactic order, sipping her coffee while simultaneously reminding them all that Earth didn't need a war to win. They just needed 30 minutes, some duct tape, and a mildly annoyed Navy SEAL with a broken arm, and nothing better to do. Escalation wasn't a threat. It was a passive consequence of her continuing to breathe in the same room as the galaxy's finest. And she hadn't even stood up yet. Somewhere deep in the bowels of Wobbleplex 7, a galactic emergency protocol AI activated for the first time in 9 centuries. It scanned the diplomatic chamber feed, flagged every sentence Jax Triggs had said as a potential security breach, then short-circuited trying to categorize ball pit defense systems under known weapon classifications. Upstairs, the summit's atmosphere was thick with dread and high-performance air filtration, and yet somehow still not enough to keep the rising panic from contaminating every oxygen-based species present. Ambassador Bugzipper was now 82% stress, goo, and slowly dissolving through her own chair, while Chancellor Mukison had entered a rare wet rocks defense state known as moist inertial denial, which mostly involved pretending he was soup. The pivotal moment came when Tentaclaw, who had somehow drawn the short tentacle, clicked his translator crystal and said, "Commander Triggs, do you consider your actions on Kepler to be, ethically defensible?" Jax blinked, as, if surprised, the conversation had veered back into morality after 30 minutes of high-functioning galactic hyperventilation. "I consider them situationally inevitable," she said calmly. "My ethics module doesn't activate until after my team is safe, and the threat is paced." Someone in the back sobbed. It might have been a diplomat or possibly a decorative sentience vase. No one was sure anymore. General Shardskull, desperately trying to salvage order, slammed his crystal palm on the table, fracturing 3 chairs and one ambassador's last nerve. "You weaponize improvisation. That's not a doctrine. It's a threat to physics." "We prefer flexible outcomes," Jax replied, swiping casually through what appeared to be a galactic weather app, filtered for tactical humidity. Levels. Then came the crisis moment, the unraveling of collective delusion. A report slid onto the holo table, blinking with red-bordered urgency. A cross-species intelligence file marked Human Threat Index, Probable Baseline Deviation. It had been compiled by the Galactic Psychological Guild under strict confidentiality. And someone, probably the station's cleaning droid with a sense of irony, had uploaded it to the public channel by accident. The file opened with Jax's name, followed by 237 attached dossiers labeled Comparable Earth Personnel, Non-Exceptional, Tier. And what followed was ruinous. Tactical reviews, combat evaluations, psychological profiling, and, most damning of all, civilians with higher threat ratios than Jax. Including a retired grandmother named Connie, who once stopped a pirate siege using only boiled tea, an airlock override, and the phrase, "Not in my knitting circle, you don't." The room imploded into bureaucratic cardiac arrest. Dr. Slimestein, the leading xeno-neuroanalyst in 3 galaxies, clutched her head and whimpered. "She's not an anomaly. She's average. She's Earth's middle setting. Oh stars, there are millions of them." Ambassador Gaseous Fumes began leaking decorative lightning from his left cumulonimbus. "You mean to tell me there are more like her? More? Humans with this level of strategic apathy?" "Apathy's a strong word," Jax said, looking up. "We just don't start fights. But ending them? That's a national pastime." Right after competitive sarcasm and deep-frying everything with a pulse. One of the robotic aides staggered backward and whispered, "Earth isn't aggressive. Earth is bored." The chamber started spiraling. Literal spiral, thanks to a malfunctioning gravity modulator triggered by Shard Skull's panic humming, which now reached frequencies only dogs and doomed regimes could hear. Floating in slow orbit, Jax calmly grabbed a handrail with her good arm, one boot still, resting smugly on the diplomatic bench. "Breathe, people," she called, as two delegates tried to negotiate asylum with a trash bin. "You invited everyone to this peace summit. You just didn't expect peace to be enforced through existential discomfort." Tentaclaw sobbed into 6 different handkerchiefs. How does your society maintain order under such unfiltered autonomy? We have sarcasm, caffeine, and the collective memory of every time we nearly blew ourselves up, Jax replied, tapping her sling with a fond expression. "That's not weakness, that's conditioning." The room stilled. Even the screaming potted fern in the corner gave up. They weren't just dealing with a rogue element anymore. They were staring into the abyss and realizing it was smiling back, with a sling, a tablet, and a snack pouch full of weaponized almonds. This wasn't diplomacy. It was forced enlightenment delivered by someone who viewed galactic collapse as an acceptable coffee break anecdote. The real crisis wasn't that Jax Triggs was here. It was that she might leave, and the galaxy would be left knowing Earth existed, fully caffeinated, unapologetically competent, and just a little bit bored. The silence in the summit chamber had metastasized into something thick and breathable, like guilt pudding or the psychic weight of realizing your galactic superiority complex had a kill switch labeled Earth's Tuesday afternoon. Jax, oblivious, or simply unconcerned, had opened a pouch of spicy protein crisps that smelled like tactical regret and disappointment-flavored cardboard. Each crunch was a declaration of war on decorum. Across the table, Ambassador Cloudfart had transitioned into his mist form entirely, and now hovered uselessly over his chair like a sad balloon that had seen too much. General Shardskull was flickering between combat stances involuntarily. Every time Jax raised an eyebrow, a different shard blade unsheathed from his crystalline shoulders before awkwardly retracting again. "So," Jax said between bites, "are we still pretending this is a peace summit, or have we moved into group therapy disguised as foreign policy?" No one answered, but a few definitely wept. Tentaclaw, now visibly vibrating with suppressed dread, leaned into his mic and asked, "Commander, if Earth doesn't pursue conquest, then what do you want?" Jax raised one eyebrow and pointed vaguely to her tablet. "Tacos, mostly, also Wi-Fi. And maybe for y'all to stop pointing planet killers at each other like toddlers with loaded staplers." A nervous giggle escaped from someone. It was hard to tell who. It might have been the chair. We assumed humanity desired power," Dr. Slimestein muttered, still hugging her neurochart like a trauma blanket. "Oh, we've got power," Jax replied, calmly scanning through a shipping manifest labeled Emergency Coffee Defense Nodes, en route. "We just don't need to prove it every damn cycle. That's exhausting. We're too busy teaching preschoolers orbital mechanics and debating if AI should be allowed to run for mayor." Ambassador Bugzippa twitched visibly. "You let artificial intelligences hold public office." "Only if they win the talent portion. Earth's a meritocracy." "Kind of. Except for reality shows. Those are chaos incarnate." Murmurs broke out. Real, actual panic murmurs. The kind that trigger insurance premiums and contingency plans involving volcanic moons. Then Jax slid a data crystal onto the table. No dramatics, no warning, just a soft click as it rolled to the center and activated, flickering into a 3-dimensional model of every alien military doctrine, logistics route, cultural weak, point, and regional power vulnerability. It was color-coded. labeled in Earth English, and titled, "So You're Thinking of Invading Earth. A Bad Idea in 5 Acts." There was a theme song, narrated by someone with a warm Midwestern accent and the subtle undercurrent of "I know where your fleet sleeps." "This is," Ambassador Gaseous Fumes whispered, voice ragged and thunderless, "espionage of the highest order." "Nah," Jax shrugged, licking spice dust off her thumb. "That's just public data. Your encryption standards are like wet tissue in a microwave. One of our junior cadets broke the Shardbois cipher last year using a Sudoku solver and a mild concussion." Shardskull stopped humming. The walls began emitting warning chimes as the panic level breached a measurable threshold known as "Oh no no no" on the diplomatic Richter scale. This changes everything," Chancellor Mucusin gurgled, mucus audibly recalculating itself. "It should," Jax said evenly. "But it probably won't, which is why I brought snacks. Watching galactic empires realize they're built on soggy ego and inherited delusion is exhausting work." A side screen flickered to life. An automated translation feed tried, and failed, to interpret her tone, defaulting to human casual, threat level, unclear, but emotionally damaging. The room was quiet again, not out of respect, but the stunned paralysis of entities who now realized they'd spent the last 2 hours in a room with what Earth classified as mildly injured and technically off-duty. And she had just presented them with the intellectual equivalent of being pantsed in front of a live audience. "We can't stop you, can we?" Tentaclaw whispered, deflating. "Stop me from what?" Jax asked, genuinely puzzled. "I'm just sitting here. I haven't even opened my secondary snack pouch. Do y'all honestly think this is what aggressive looks like?" No one moved. Not even the potted fern, which had long since achieved spiritual enlightenment through sheer exposure. "You have maps of our minds," Slimestein croaked. "You understand us better than we understand ourselves." "We try. We read. A lot. And we do these little things called listening, and remembering what someone did the last 100 times they tried to kill us. It's this weird human thing called pattern recognition." Bugzippa quietly unplugged her translation, node and began praying to her species' ancestor deity, Greg the Swimmer of Regret. "This isn't intimidation," Cloudfart rasped, recondensing just enough to spill anxiety across his chair. "It's inevitability. You're not threatening us. You're predicting us." Jax gave a slow, relaxed nod. "Exactly. It's not fear. It's awareness. And y'all are finally catching up." Then she smiled. Not the smirk. Not the dry, dismissive grin. But an actual, sincere smile. The kind that humans flash right before volunteering to build a barbecue on a volcano. And that's when the room collectively decided, if this was human diplomacy, they needed a planetary therapist, or a very long nap. Ideally both. The alert chime that broke the silence was soft, harmless even, a cheerful ding that suggested your food delivery had arrived, or perhaps a cosmic reckoning had just been signed for. Jax glanced at her tablet. "Huh, my ride's early. Guess the pilot skipped the bureaucratic debris field this time." She stood up slowly, stretching her one functional arm, rotating her shoulder like she'd just finished a light workout, rather than psychologically vaporizing the galactic. "Elite." As she rose, half the room flinched instinctively. The other half leaned back so fast their chairs collapsed in unison like synchronized cowardice. "Well, this has been lovely," she said, brushing imaginary dust off her sling. 10 out of 10 summit. Would accidentally crash again. Ambassador Cloudfart made a noise like a kettle trying to negotiate a truce. "You can't just leave. You've dismantled centuries of interstellar diplomacy with casual snack commentary and emotionally loaded metaphors." "I mean, technically I can," Jax replied, grabbing her data crystal, her espresso mug, and a pouch labeled Tactical Raisins. "You've got all the files. a mild cultural identity crisis, and a healthy respect for Earth now. That's what I call a successful peace initiative. And Dr. Slimestein, eyes hollow and voice cracking like wet chalk, asked, "But how do we stop this from happening again?" "Easy," Jax said halfway to the exit. "Don't start wars with species you haven't Googled properly." The pause. Then she turned back and gave the room a once-over. Her expression shifted, less sarcastic now, more honest, calm but piercing. "Look, I get it. You see us and think we're unstable, violent, contradictory, and we are. But we're not trying to rule you. We don't want your territory. We've got enough of our own, with slightly too many bears. We want options, trade, stability, coffee that doesn't taste like guilt. And yeah, if someone threatens our people, we will go full extinction jazz hands. But that's not aggression. That's love. And you don't mess with a species that treats affection like a tactical doctrine." She stepped forward, triggering several ambassadors to instinctively hold their breath, their translators muting out of self-preservation. "We are not your enemy," she continued, softer now, "but we are not your prey either. And if peace is built on fear, then congratulations, you've achieved a very stable one." Tentaclaw made a small whimpering noise that might have been agreement. "One last thing," Jax added, reaching into her tactical pouch and tossing a small, gleaming cube onto the table. "Complimentary upgrade to your security protocols. We ran a simulation on how to improve your defense networks, without resorting to moral collapse. Should be easy to implement, unless, your committee needs 6 years and 17 forms to approve logic." She winked, then turned on her heel and walked out like she owned the place, which, emotionally speaking, she now kind of did. The doors hissed shut behind her, and for a moment, the summit chamber was frozen in stunned, wounded reverence. The kind reserved for near-death experiences and deeply moving interpretive dance. Chancellor Mukison gurgled something that roughly translated to, "What just happened?" "We were not invaded," murmured Bugzippa. "We were educated." At gunpoint, with smiles. General Shardskull, still humming involuntarily, whispered, "She didn't conquer us. She didn't even threaten us. She just existed in the room long enough for us to realize we were unarmed at the soul." Outside, aboard the drop shuttle, Jax sat back in the seat, finally exhaling. Her daughter's message pinged again. A hologram of a tiny child holding up a rough diagram of a railgun embedded in a treehouse. "Needs a better power source," Jax muttered, tapping in a suggestion and attaching a file titled "Fusion Cores for Toddlers, a Beginner's Guide." The pilot, a robotic AI shaped like a disgruntled turtle with wings, glanced back. "Summit went well?" "Define well," Jax replied, smiling faintly. "Nobody died. Nobody declared war. I got a new espresso recipe and 7 threats of spiritual disintegration. So yeah, pretty mellow." The ship ascended, and down below, galactic leaders sat in a room full of glowing data, internal screaming, and the slowly dawning realization that humanity was not the sword at their throat, but the shadow behind every throne, and they hadn't even seen the sharp ones yet. Peace, it turned out, didn't come through treaties. It came through trauma, bonding with a woman who discussed orbital annihilation like she was ordering tacos. And somewhere across the stars, 1,000 governments began rewriting their doctrines, not to prepare for war, but to prepare for visits. Because if this was Earth's diplomatic response to a peace summit, no one wanted to know what they'd send to a funeral.